The late summer heat in Brookdale was oppressive, making the air thick and heavy as if the whole town was simmering in an oven. Jasmine Carter adjusted her sunglasses and stepped out of her sleek black SUV, parked just outside the small town diner. She had been on the road since dawn, traveling incognito before officially starting her new post as Brookdale's chief of police in 2 days. No one in town knew her yet, and she preferred it that way. Sometimes seeing the reality of how people acted when they thought no one important was watching told you more than any police report could. She was dressed casually, denim jeans, a simple white blouse, and sneakers, but she carried herself with the calm authority of someone who had faced danger and commanded respect her entire career. That authority, however, was lost on the two white officers leaning against their cruiser across the street. They were sipping iced sodas and eyeing her like a predator sizes up prey. Officer Randy Red McAllister, tall with sunburnt skin and a crooked smirk, elbowed his partner, Deputy Cole Briggs, and nodded toward her. "Well, look what the heat dragged in," Red drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "City girl out here thinking she belongs?" Cole chuckled, squinting against the sun. "Or maybe she's lost. But I'm thinking maybe we should give her a proper Brookdale welcome." Jasmine ignored them at first, heading toward the diner, but she could feel their stares like hot coals on her back. Before she reached the door, the crunch of boots on gravel made her pause. "Hey, there's sweetheart," Red called out, his drawl turning more condescending. "You from around here? 'Cause we don't see many like you." The implication in his tone was clear. Jasmine turned slowly, her gaze steady but unreadable. "Just passing through," she said calmly. Cole took a swig of his drink and smirked. "Funny, you look like trouble waiting to happen. You know, folks round here don't like outsiders stirring the pot." Red stepped closer, too close, his shadow falling over her. "You got ID? Or maybe you need a little guidance." He let the last word hang, almost daring her to react. Jasmine's lips curved in the faintest smile, but her eyes were sharp. "No," she said evenly, "I don't need guidance." She turned back toward the diner, but Red wasn't done. "Careful, darlin'. In this town, we like to keep things in order." Jasmine didn't flinch, but she filed away every word, every smug grin. They had no idea who they were talking to. The two officers smirked as if they had all the time in the world, circling Mariah like wolves sizing up prey. Officer Dan took a long swig from his bottle of water, letting the excess drip down his chin as he stared her up and down with the kind of look that made her skin crawl. "You lost, sweetheart," he drawled, his tone laced with mockery. Officer Rick leaned casually against the hood of their cruiser, spinning his nightstick in one hand. "Yeah," he chimed in, "this ain't exactly the part of town for." He paused, giving her a deliberate once-over. "You're kind." The words dripped with that familiar venom of prejudice. Mariah kept her face calm, her posture steady, but her fingers tightened around her bag. The ID inside felt like it was burning through the fabric, her shield, her authority, the truth of who she was. She could end this entire scene with one motion. But no, she thought, not yet. She wanted to see how far they would go. Sometimes letting people reveal their full ugliness was the best way to make the eventual reckoning hit harder. Officer Dan took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. "So, what's in the bag? Anything I should know about?" His hand twitched toward it like he was itching for an excuse. Mariah's eyes flickered to his fingers, then back to his face, her voice even but edged with steel. "You really want to go through my things?" she asked softly. The calmness seemed to irritate him more than fear would have. "Yeah, I do." He snapped as though he'd been challenged. Rick pushed off the hood, walking around behind her. "Maybe she's hiding something. You never know. People like her." He let the implication hang in the air, heavy and disgusting. Mariah could feel the heat of anger rising at her chest, but she held it in check. She had been in far worse situations, hostile standoffs, tense negotiations with armed suspects, moments when a wrong move meant someone wouldn't make it home. Compared to those, these two posturing men were almost laughable. "Almost. Tell you what," she said, her voice smooth. "How about I show you exactly what's in here?" Her hand dipped into her purse. The officers tensed slightly, but not enough to prepare them for what came next. She didn't pull out a weapon or an ID, not yet. Instead, she withdrew a small bottle of water and unscrewed the cap, taking a slow sip. The move was deliberate, a mirror of Dan's earlier drink. Her eyes never left his. The officers exchanged a glance, irritation growing. She could see it in their faces. They weren't used to this. They were used to compliance, to people cowering, to getting their way with nothing more than a sneer. But Mariah wasn't built for bowing. Not to them. Not to anyone who didn't deserve it. In her mind, she was counting down. Just a little longer, she told herself. Let them push one step too far. Then they'd see exactly who they'd been talking to, and they would remember it for the rest of their careers. By the next morning, word about the roadside incident had already begun to spread through the precinct, but not in the way one might expect. Officer Daniels and Officer Kent, still convinced they had acted within their rights, recounted their version of the events over coffee in the break room, painting the black woman as combative and disrespectful. Their laughter echoed off the walls, but a few officers exchanged wary glances, not because they knew the truth yet, but because the woman's composure and words the previous day had sounded different. She didn't act like someone afraid of authority. She acted like authority. While Daniels tried to get laughs by mimicking her cool tone, Sergeant Wallace, one of the more seasoned members of the department, walked in mid-story. His brow furrowed as soon as he heard the mocking tone. "Who exactly did you stop?" Wallace asked sharply, setting his coffee down. Daniels smirked. Some uppity woman who thought she was above the law. Kent chuckled, adding, "She even had the nerve to say I'd regret it." Wallace's frown deepened. "What was her name?" Daniels shrugged, but Kent thought back and muttered, something like Renee Carter, or maybe Commander Carter?" The moment the name left his mouth, Wallace froze. His mind snapped to a departmental memo from a month ago, a confidential notice about a leadership transition. The new police chief, appointed to reform the department's culture, was due to arrive in just a few days. Her name? Chief Renee Carter. The realization hit him like a gut punch, and without another word, he turned and left the break room. Daniels raised an eyebrow. What's his problem? But Kent was suddenly uneasy. Later that afternoon, Wallace pulled them both aside. His voice was low and sharp. "If the woman you stopped yesterday was Renee Carter, you two are finished. She's the new chief. I'd start praying she doesn't recognize your faces." Daniels laughed it off, thinking Wallace was trying to scare them, but Kent couldn't shake the image of her calm, steady gaze as she spoke. She didn't have to raise her voice to command the situation. He remembered the bad-shaped outline under her jacket that he had dismissed at the time. A cold pit formed in his stomach. We might be in trouble," he muttered to Daniels later. But Daniels waved him off. "She was just some woman. You'll see." What neither of them realized was that Renee Carter remembered everything, their smirks, their tone, the way they had looked at her, and she was already preparing to make her first official move as chief. The countdown to their reckoning had already begun. By Monday morning, the entire precinct was buzzing, not with the usual crime reports or patrol schedules, but with whispers about what had happened on Friday night. The rumor mill had transformed the story into a dozen different versions. Some claimed she was an undercover FBI agent, others swore she was planted by Internal Affairs to clean house. The truth, however, was far simpler and far more dangerous for the reputations of the officers involved. Chief Williams had spent the weekend quietly reviewing body cam footage, dispatch logs, and citizen complaints. The incident with her wasn't an isolated misstep. It was the tip of an iceberg she had been expecting to find. In fact, she had a thick folder waiting on her desk labeled Pattern of Behavior, filled with cases where officers had overstepped, harassed, or targeted residents in ways that reeked of prejudice. That morning, she called an emergency meeting. No pleasantries, no small talk. The conference room felt suffocating as she shut the door and placed the printed transcripts of Friday night's encounter on the table for everyone to see. "Read it," she ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. The officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact, the sound of rustling paper amplifying the silence. When one of them tried to mumble an excuse about just following protocol, she stopped him cold. Protocol does not include harassment. It does not include intimidation. And it does not include humiliating citizens because they don't fit your idea of who belongs here. Her tone wasn't just authoritative, it was personal. She spoke from the raw place that Friday night had reopened in her, the countless times she'd been profiled before she wore the badge. She made it clear this wasn't just about her. This was about the entire community losing trust in a department sworn to protect it. By the end of the meeting, several officers looked visibly shaken. The younger recruits, in particular, kept glancing at her with something close to respect, or maybe fear. Either way, she didn't care. Respect could be built. Fear could be unlearned. But the rot? That had to be cut out. When the meeting ended, she didn't dismiss them with a handshake. Instead, she slid a stack of mandatory retraining orders across the table. Your days of operating unchecked are over, she said, looking each officer in the eye. If you can't handle that, turn in your badge. There was no mistaking her message. This wasn't a warning, it was the beginning of a reckoning. The tension in the precinct was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every officer involved in the park incident had been summoned to the conference room, their faces pale, their posture stiff. Word had spread like wildfire. The woman they had humiliated, cornered, and barked orders at just 2 days ago was now officially their commanding officer. No one dared to speak as the door opened, revealing not just Chief Denise Carter, but also Mayor Leonard Briggs, a no-nonsense leader known for his intolerance toward misconduct in the force. His gaze was icy as it swept across the room, lingering on the officers who had been part of the water incident, as some were already calling it behind closed doors. Mayor Briggs didn't waste time. What happened in that park was unacceptable, he began, his voice sharp enough to make a few officers flinch. Not just because you disrespected a civilian, but because you disrespected your own chief before she even put on the uniform. He gestured toward Denise, whose calm but unyielding expression spoke volumes. We expect professionalism, restraint, and basic human decency from this department. I saw none of that in the footage I reviewed. Some officers shifted uncomfortably, others stared at the table, but no one dared interrupt. Denise finally stepped forward, her badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I didn't join this department to make enemies. I joined to make changes, she said, her voice low but commanding. But change doesn't happen unless the rod is cut out. You may not like me. You may not respect me yet. But you will follow the law, you will treat civilians with dignity, and you will uphold the oath you took, or you will find another job. A suffocating silence followed, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioner. The mayor's phone buzzed, and after a brief glance at the screen, his expression hardened even more. That was the governor, he said. This incident is already making headlines. There will be no second chances. If you think you can't handle following orders from a black woman, resign now and save us the trouble of firing you. The room stayed still for a moment longer before one officer slowly stood, dropped his badge on the table, and walked out. A ripple of unease moved through the others. Denise's eyes followed him, but she didn't gloat. Her victory wasn't in making people quit, but in making them understand. When the meeting finally adjourned, the precinct felt different. The officers weren't just looking at her as the woman from the park anymore. They were looking at her as Chief Carter, the leader who had walked through fire on her first week and refused to bow. The air inside the precinct felt heavier than it had in years. Word had traveled fast. By the time Chief Angela Parker stepped through the glass doors, nearly every officer in the building had already heard the rumor. Still, no one truly believed it until they saw her, standing tall in her crisp navy uniform, her golden badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Conversations stuttered to a halt, coffee cups froze halfway to lips, and the sound of clacking keyboards suddenly became deafening. The same two officers who had harassed her on the roadside, Sergeant Hayes and Officer Kent, were standing by the front desk, their faces drained of color, like someone had just read them their own obituaries. Angela's eyes swept the room, calm but piercing, scanning every corner of the precinct she now commanded. She didn't raise her voice, didn't bark orders, yet her presence alone carried more weight than the loudest shout. She walked directly to the front desk, where the duty officer stammered, "See Chief Parker. Welcome, we didn't know you'd be arriving today." The two offending officers tried to shrink into the background, but Angela stopped in front of them. "Gentlemen," she said slowly, "you seem familiar. I believe we've met." Her words were laced with icy precision, the kind that made spines stiffen. Kent's mouth opened, then closed again like a fish gasping for air. Hayes muttered, "Chief, we didn't realize that's exactly the problem." Angela cut in, her tone unwavering. "You didn't realize because you didn't bother to see the person in front of you. You saw a stereotype, not a citizen, not a colleague, certainly not your superior." The silence in the room thickened. Officers exchanged glances, the unspoken truth passing between them. If she could publicly confront them, no one was safe from accountability. Angela turned toward the entire room now. "This department is about change. Effective immediately, there will be zero tolerance for harassment, racial profiling, or abuse of power. If you cannot serve this community with integrity, you will not wear this uniform." A ripple of discomfort moved through the ranks. Some officers looked away, ashamed. Others stood taller, as if relieved someone was finally saying what needed to be said. Angela knew there would be resistance. Entrenched attitudes don't vanish overnight, but she wasn't here to be liked. She was here to transform the culture from the ground up. The city had placed its trust in her, and she intended to prove that justice wasn't just a word on a wall plaque. As she walked toward her new office, the echo of her heels on the tiled floor sounded like a countdown. Change had already begun, and the old ways were on borrowed time. The room was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. Every officer who had laughed at Naomi just days ago now sat stiff in their chairs, avoiding her gaze. The morning briefing was about to start, and she was at the podium, her badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Good morning," Naomi said, her voice steady but charged with quiet authority. "We're going to do things differently from now on." Her tone was calm, but it carried the weight of every insult, every smirk, and every ounce of disrespect she had endured. Eyes darted toward each other across the room, but no one spoke. She continued, "Last week, some of you forgot what this badge stands for. It's not just metal, it's trust, and if you can't carry it with integrity, you won't be carrying it at all." A few officers shifted uncomfortably. As she spoke, she laid out a new set of policies, strict accountability measures, mandatory community outreach, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination on or off duty. The same men who had tried to humiliate her were now scribbling notes, careful not to challenge her. But she wasn't interested in revenge. She wanted transformation. "This isn't about me," she said, scanning the room. "It's about the people we serve. And if you can't respect them, you don't belong here." Her words landed like a gavel strike. Later that afternoon, Naomi walked through the precinct halls, now strangely quiet. The officers she passed nodded respectfully, some mumbling apologies they hadn't found the courage to give in public. She accepted them with a brief nod, no need for grand gestures. The real victory was the shift she could already feel in the air. Outside, the community had begun to take notice. Residents who had once avoided speaking to officers were now showing cautious signs of trust. A young black boy ran up to Naomi and handed her a drawing of her, in uniform with the words, "You make us safe." That small gesture hit her harder than any award or recognition could. That evening, as the sun set over the city, Naomi stood in her office, looking at the skyline. She thought back to the day those thirsty cops had harassed her, laughing like they had all the power. Now they reported to her, and she held the authority to ensure no one else endured what she had. "This is just the start," she whispered to herself. And it was. Naomi wasn't just their chief. She was the city's protector, the community's advocate, and the unshakable reminder that respect is not given based on appearance, but earned through action. The badge on her chest no longer felt heavy, it felt right.